Hi there, and welcome to a bonus episode of OMAKASE, my writing advice and inspiration podcast. Every month, I make a special workshop. Every month, I put up a poll, and my patrons vote on it. The topic that emerges at the top gets turned into a long-format workshop like this one. If you really enjoy this one, please consider leaving a thank you to my patrons. They are the ones who chose it. And now let us begin. Today, we are going to be talking about write what you know. This is a piece of advice that is as old as time itself. And I remember stumbling upon this particular piece of advice at every stage of my writing journey. Creative writing courses in high school, creative classes in college, searching through Tumblr and the internet, YouTube for writing advice. And in my own experience and the experience of my closest friends, we have found two sides to this conversation. If you're new to writing, I am going to explain to you what write what you know is supposed to mean, how it is misinterpreted, and what you can learn from it. At the end of it all, write what you know is a coin, and it has two sides to it. I don't think neither side is very good. I think this particular phrase, although it's kind of catchy and very easy to digest, I think it might just be the piece of writing advice that is the most prone to being misunderstood and to lead writers astray. So let's take it from the top. We're first going to talk about what the two sides are, the downsides and the upsides to both of those, because as you know, I like to format these videos in a positive manner. I want you to learn. I'm not here to talk down to you. I'm not here to tell you that you're doing things wrong. I want to inspire you to create. I want you to emerge out of this podcast feeling better about writing and inspired to get back to work. So I'm going to explain the two sides, the ups, the downs, what you can learn from them, my own personal experience. And we're going to talk about the subject of the fantastical. Let's take it from the top. Now, if you're interested as to the origin of this particular phrase, who said it first? Where did it come from? I have seen it attributed to Twain, Hemingway, and a bunch of other people. It seems almost as though no one can agree on who said it, and even the references I found that had the quote from which apparently that saying came from, it looks nothing like it. So there may be a very solid answer in the internet, I couldn't find it right away. But at the end of it all, I feel we can both understand that we're starting with a phrase that is very open-ended. Write what you know is an open-ended statement. And I think part of the reason why it has stuck is that different people attach different meaning to it. And that's not inherently a problem. Part of being a writer is finding what works for you. Finding your own meaning, the things that inspire you, the things that help you create your art. I understand why a catchy phrase like write what you know, or what some people would attribute as don't write what you know, has stuck around, and I get it. Today, we're gonna exercise a few demons and find meaning in here together, okay? This should go without saying, but I'm gonna say it anyway. The following you're about to hear is my advice, my opinion, and what works for me. Don't take it as gospel. Instead, take it as my own point of view, my experience with this subject. I've been creating writing advice content for a long time, and I began at the very beginning of my journey, I started because I found so much negativity. I found so much don't do this, don't do that. I found a lot of don'ts and seldom any do's. I seldom found anything that left me feeling inspired. Every time I would go looking for writing advice, I would come out of it uninspired, sad, unmotivated, and I wanted to create something different. We're going to analyze the idea of write what you know today, and I want to leave you better than any advice I read back then left me feeling, okay? But before we can find the good, we have to analyze what's there to begin with. There is two sides to the idea of write what you know. There's two polar opposites that, depending on how the person presents it, their advice ultimately ends up being. There's a side to write what you know, like the coin I mentioned. One of the sides of that coin implies that writing what you know is what you should do, because the things that you have experienced are the only things that you have any right, or that you should be writing about, because they're the only things that you have absolute concrete experience with. This is the version of write what you know that my wife encountered in college. That was very strict. And when you have a professor telling you that you should only write about things you have experienced yourself, it can feel incredibly limiting. Especially if you're young. I am going to speak very candidly. I hope you forgive me for saying something so harsh. But I cannot think of a worse poison than to tell a young writer, someone in high school, that they should only write what they know, because their field of experience is so narrow, so limited. When I think about that, I get this feeling in my chest. The kind of feeling of lost stories. People who could have gone on to create so much, and somewhere along the line, someone gave them that horrible piece of advice that made them feel limited. My wife felt like that when she first encountered it. And getting that from a professor, from someone in a position of power, someone who you're supposed to be looking up to, someone who's supposed to be teaching you, helping you create, that's poison. Forgive me for being so candid. I really feel that. And I wish for nothing but to undo that. If someone has ever told you that the only fiction of value, the only words of value you can put on the page are those inspired by your own experiences, I have a few more words for you. And I hope they help. Both sides of the coin are not all bad. There is something good to be learned from this, from the idea of taking from one's experiences to fuel one's writing. There is something good there. There is something to be learned there. But first we must look at the ineffective advice. The sentiment that the only thing of value you could ever make are things inspired by your own experiences. Even now, I don't think I have to extrapolate further because you already understand. There's only so much we know ourselves, or we think we know. But there is something good that you can learn from this. There is something good you can draw from this. But first, we must look at the other side. We must have the full story. We must see both sides of the coin and what they do the most ineffective. Not what they do wrong, but ineffective. It could be better. You can improve. You can do it. On the flip side of write what you know, there is the implication. Some people have written it out as an inverse of write what you know. Don't write what you don't know. It is a sentiment that I found from the words and advice of fellow writers in college. This sentiment, you'll find a lot of this on the internet too. The sentiment that you are not allowed to write about anything that you yourself have not experienced. Let me say that again. This implied rule that you as a writer are not allowed to write about anything which you have not experienced in the real world. And this here brings with itself more overt limitations. There is a whole realm of the fantastical that is simply locked away from you. But even more so than fireballs and dragons and werewolves, which none of us have experience with, let's be honest, there's also real things from real life that are a part of our world that we may not have experience with, but we want to have appear in our stories. Now, this itself, I feel I've already said too much. And I know. There is a sense out there that certain people are not allowed to write about certain stories. And I understand where that feeling comes from. But I guess I should just say it right now. Writing, storytelling, consuming stories is the ultimate form of empathy. To be able to see the world, to see a story through someone else's point of view, through someone else's eyes, and to understand, to see, to feel their pain, their struggle. I would never, under any circumstance, tell someone that they're not allowed to write about something. I would never, under any circumstance, guide someone away from wanting to speak about real things that are happening in the real world to real people. Now, if you have been listening to my content, you know this, but I am non-binary. I am part of the LGBT plus spectrum. I am queer as heck, and I still get close friends of friends who are writers, who are cisgender, who are straight, who tell me that they want to have a gay character in their stories, who want to have a trans character in their stories, but they are afraid that they might get him wrong, or that people will tell them that they are not allowed to write about these stories because they themselves have not experienced what it's like to be that way. And do you know what my reply is to that? Do you know what my reply is to don't write what you don't know? These situations are a golden opportunity to expand on empathy. The advice that I always offer to someone when they want to write about something they've never experienced, regardless of whether it is about a minority, about a real thing that happens in the real world, or about historical fiction, or about any particular genre, is that I recommend that you do lots and lots of research. And that if you're talking about real people, or something that real people deal with, you should reach out to real people and see what they think. And see if you nailed it. To see if you captured the feeling effectively. There's nothing wrong with that. That's kind of part of the writing process. You reaching out for feedback is pivotal. It's the thing where, yeah, I have friends who have sent me their writing asking me, if they tackled a particular LGBT character correctly, if they did it justice, if they tackled the situation well. And I think that's better. I think it is better to go beyond your boundaries, to go beyond the things you know, and to learn and to grow, and to place all this empathy and understanding in this character, so that others may understand them, It's magic. That's why books are so powerful. Because books are the ultimate form of empathy. Of being able to understand others. To be able to learn from them. And you know me. I would very much rather you grow and learn. And even if it requires stumbling and reaching out for feedback, it's better than to just not do it at all. Writing is very important to me. And Write What You Know has been a rock in my shoe. A little stone in my shoe. It's been this thing that I've encountered every single step along the journey. Through my writing life, through my writing advice life, that and the hero's journey, wink wink, that and the hero's journey have been the two pieces of general writing advice that I've had to slay at every corner. And here we are again. Write What You Know has two sides to it. The idea that you should only draw from personal experiences because that's the stuff you know for certain, and that you should never write about anything you have never experienced yourself because you have no right to talk about that. Both of these ideas are faulty. Both of these ideas lead to ineffective stories. And I am going to tell you about the different ways in which you can learn the good to draw the best out of these things and improve. But because I was too excited to talk about it, you already know about one. On the other side of the coin, don't write what you don't know. Something you can learn from this is that you can write about whatever you want. You can bring whatever you want into fiction as long as you do your research. If it's the Civil War you want to write about, if it's a particular criminal family in the 1920s, if it is LGBT people, if it is a racial minority, regardless of what it is, you have to do research. You have to look into how it is like to be there, how those places work, how those cultures work. You have to learn, expand. You have to improve on your empathy. It's the only way. And this is the thing, where I find that people already know this lesson, but sometimes our human minds are so bad at understanding, at opening up. 'Cause yeah, isn't it silly? The idea of wanting to write a novel based during the American Civil War without doing any research? Isn't that silly? It's really silly, isn't it? It almost feels like a foolish errand. Why would you jump into a very specific historical setting with no knowledge? The same goes for the realness. The real things that real people experience. You can learn about those things. You can reach out to people for advice. You can write about those stories. You can have them be a part of your writing. And that's okay. I know that this is the point where a lot of us disagree. And that's fair. You are entitled to your opinion. And you are entitled to your own point of view. And I do not disagree with that. But from my point of view, from my experience, I would very much rather people expand on their empathy. Explore these other lives, these other point of views. I assume, and I know what you're thinking. I know what someone else. Stop writing that YouTube comment. What about when people just use minorities? Just for shock value. Just for canon fodder. Just for LGBT characters who just die for the character development of the main cisgender straight characters. What about those? I don't think people like that would be looking for writing advice. I don't think people like that would be clicking on a video about Write What You Know. But I want to believe that if you're reaching for writing advice and you want to learn, you want to improve, you want to see how you can be better, I feel in my heart that you are ready to make that step. It's not even a hard one. As I mentioned, if you want to write about stuff you have never experienced yourself, stuff that you have no experience with, stuff that is real in this real world, there's so much research you can do. There's so many places you can find the information you need. There's people you can reach out to, stories you can learn from. And that, just like traveling, just like experiencing different cultures, will enrich your life. That's just the win-win-win. Research, learning, improving yourself, these are good things. So, I would love to inspire you that if there's something you want to write about, and it's something you don't know about, research. There's no limit to how much more you can learn and how you can improve as a person just simply by examining another point of view. Okay? Let's check back on the other side of the coin. What is something good we can learn from write what you know? As this shorthand for only write about things you yourself have experienced. How can we improve from this? What can we draw from this to make us better? To help our writing, to improve? And there's one thing that you might have done without realizing it. Most of us do this without realizing it, honestly. And that is that sometimes we draw inspiration from things that happened to us in the past. My favorite example of this is the late author Terry Pratchett, who said a long time ago that when his father died, as he was attending the funeral and he was seeing the casket descending into the earth, Terry Pratchett felt this terrible, terrible sadness, this dread wash over him. And even worse than that was the realization that someday, without him realizing it, he was going to take this pain and it was going to show up somewhere, somehow, in one of his novels. Sometimes the things we experience in real life can be an amazing catalyst for our imagination. Fuel for ideas and characters and moments. Sometimes it is the calamities that befall us. Sometimes are the things we hear, that we eavesdrop as we're shopping, as we're living, as we're walking from one place to another. The sights, the feelings. There are things that I come back to. Things that I experience in the real world that I find not only comfort but inspiration in. The overwhelming size of the ocean. The colors of the sunset. The cold sting of winter. These feelings, these sensations prop up time and time again in my writing. There are things that I have experienced myself. Sometimes I don't realize it. Sometimes I purposefully add them to the story. At the end of it all, they are inspiration, fuel for the writing. Sometimes writing can help us escape. Sometimes writing can help us overcome pain, grief, and emerge out of it better, stronger. The one caveat that I've always had, the one caveat that I will bring up right now, is that using one's experiences as fuel for writing is good, but only as long as that remains fuel. Fuel for your writing. Not whole cloth elements that you just drop in the story. I read so much. I read so many stories in college, because we did feedback in college. Every week, we would bring 10 pages of writing, and we would give feedback to that person. That's how we did it. That's how it went. And I read so much writing that was, at the core of it all, a kind of monologue. Talking down. Taking real people and turning them into caricatures for the sake of an argument, for the sake of winning a fight that happened years ago. Real events that happened to this person, projected through the field of fiction. For the sake of closure. And that's not bad. I don't think it's wrong to write about the things that pain you. My only thing is that when you go to a college class and it is the job of the people around you to give you criticism and feedback, it's hard sometimes. Because you can tell how tender, how crimson those feelings are. And I can only imagine it gets worse when you put those in a novel that you intend to publish. I would almost recommend during the revision process to dampen those feelings, to add more, to make that its own thing. The worst experiences I had with this, where I would read someone's writing that was very clearly a personal experience, was when there was a mean-spiritedness behind it. This kind of thing where a certain character was very clearly based on a real person. And this character was a punching bag of calamity, of unfortunateness, of inconvenience. And the camera would focus. The narration would center on their suffering and pain. And that stuff was rough. You know? Just like there's people who deal with their pain and grief through writing, and I think that's great as long as you can make it work into a story. You have these people who would basically... I can't think of another way to say it, but they would end up kind of murdering real-life people on the page out of frustration. I don't know. If this is how you are dealing with your strife and your pain, you should probably go seek some professional help. Talk with someone about this. It was always so awkward sitting at that table, you know? Where I'm like, I'm pretty sure this guy is writing about a family member. I'm pretty sure this is about a family member. And it's some dark stuff. The kind of stuff that, you know, did I sign up for that? Probably not. If you want to inject your own real-life experiences into the story, I beg you. I'm on my knees. I beg you, please. Use those experiences as fuel. The feelings. The sensations. I'm about to get real right now. If you have very strong feelings towards your abusive mother, I would like to inspire you to write a story about what it's like to struggle with that, instead of a story where an abusive mother faces countless types of misfortune, grief, pain, and torture. We got really real there. But that's part of it, isn't it? Because I saw so much... That's one of those things where that person could have written a very touching story about what it's like. But instead their writing felt mean-spirited, it felt cruel, it was dark stuff. I want to inspire you to not be like that guy. Don't be that guy. You see that guy? Don't do that. Only villains do that. Use your personal experiences as fuel. That right there that right there. There are things that I come back to, feelings of wonder that have stricken me, and I've talked about them on the podcast. I remember there's this one experience that my wife and I had when we went to San Francisco for a concert, and the morning after, we were wandering around San Francisco looking for some place to eat, and time got by us because we're surrounded by people in this beautiful city, surrounded by beautiful people, and we end up stumbling into this ramen restaurant that apparently just opened, and I had the greatest bowl of ramen in my life. And I remember teary-eyed looking into that bowl and seeing the glistening of that broth against the lights overhead, against the neon of that restaurant, and imagining a constellation amidst that broth, against every ingredient in there, a constellation of flavor on my taste buds. And I know, and I can sense it in me, that someday that description will sneak itself into my writing and I will not notice it. Someday, when a character finds themselves before a delicious piece of food that just brings them joy, this description will sneak out of my subconscious, through my fingertips, and into that story. Fuel, inspiration. These are the things that you know that I want to inspire you to write about. And now, while on the subject of my experience, I want to talk to you about a shortcoming, a faulty analysis of write what you know. Because what you know is only one point of view. The way in which you experience things is one point of view. And sometimes we need more. We need to research, we need to learn, we need to expand our understanding. And I'm going to tell you a really real example. We're not done with the realness yet. Let me tell you why I don't cry. I have to admit that I have never cried at a funeral. And there's a myriad of reasons for that. And I'll tell you in a second why I said that I don't do that. But I want you to realize that if I had to write only what I knew for myself, my characters would never cry. My characters would never cry. I don't cry at funerals because I have held it dear in my heart, the belief of honoring those, of loving those around us while they are alive. I have met so many people. I have talked to so many people at their deathbed, begging those around them to not cry during their funeral, to instead feel joy in their heart when they see them now when they're alive, and to speak truthfully and lovingly. That is why I hug so tightly. That is why I always tell those who mean the most to me that I love them. That is why I always speak candidly and truthfully. Even if people don't believe it sometimes, even if they think that I'm trying to do something or one-up them in some way, I mean it when I say it. That I love them, that they mean the world to me. If anything, just so that in the case that something happens, some unseen misfortune befalls me or them, that they know I loved them and they meant the world to me. I've always made my peace with death that way. Relatives, close friends, I always told them how I felt. So when the closure of death arrived, I had no words left to write. And that's me. That's how I deal with grief. And I know that someone's going to think that I am full of something, but it really is it. I love you in life. I have been to so many funerals. I see no value in flowers. And that is not something I said, but something that I heard from people on their deathbed so many times. I find no value in flowers. So if I was to write stories from my personal experience, would my characters cry? No. But what you gotta realize is that the act of creating stories, at least to me, has always been about taking what I know. I imagine a table. I imagine a table full of mementos, of little things. And I put my hand on it, and I swipe everything that makes me, me, and I put it over to the side. When I write a character, I don't ask myself, well, what does sadness feels like? I ask myself, how would this character feel when they're sad? What would they do when they're sad? How would they react in the situation? Empathy is key. Because sometimes we will write about people who are unlike us in every single way. I have done this with every book. Every character I've written is so unlike me that I begin the journey learning to understand them. The first third of every novel is the part of the novel where I spend the most time revising. Because during the first third, I'm learning their voice. I'm learning to understand how they behave, how they react, how they grieve, and how they feel victory. By the time I make it over the first third of the story, I understand them better. By the time I make it past the second third, I understand them. And their voice comes naturally to me now. And I understand them. And I know the characters who would cry at a funeral, and those that don't. I don't want to make it seem like that's an exercise I actively think about. But sometimes I do like to imagine how different characters would behave in the same situation. How would this character deal with the loss of a loved one? How would this character deal with the loss of a parent? How would they all behave during the same funeral? Where would they stand? What would they do? How would they grieve? And I have yet to find a single character across the field of my imagination, across that infinite blackness, who would grieve the way that I grieve. And that's okay. We're all different. We all deal with grief differently. And what matters at the end is not that we all do everything the same, but that we understand each other. There is one more thing. I want to talk about the subject of the fantastical. I want to talk about fantasy and science fiction and horror and monsters and aliens and angels and demons and ghosts. How can we write about these things when clearly you're not a ghost? I have never seen a ghost, because ghosts don't exist. But if you were to write a story about a ghost, how would you tackle it? How can you write about a wizard and fireballs and dragons and dwarves and elves and spaceships and aliens and talking spiders and deities and gods and hydras with 1,000 heads and unicorns and fairies and goblins and duendes, yokai and specters? How can you write about these impossible things if you yourself have never experienced them? Research is one, of course, if you're writing about the fictional idea of the ghost. But the thing that helps me the most is to center the exercise on that point of view. Not to think, how would a ghost behave? But rather, humanize them. How would that ghost as a person, with their own point of view, their own life and feeling and heart, how would they behave? How would they act? How would they impact the story? And this trickles down. This is all part of the same feeling. I have described it in the past, the idea of not only submerging yourself, but also displacing yourself so that you can fully analyze and write about this other point of view, this someone else, this somebody, this some other person that exists in this story. You're not a werewolf. And even that person is not every werewolf, is one werewolf. One person who happens to be that. How do they react? How do they live? How do they speak? That right there is the trick. That right there is the difficult part. But from that to world building things, to magic, what does it feel like to shoot a fireball from your palm? What does it feel like to jump hundreds of feet into the air? What is it like to possess the ability to see into the future? What is it like to become invisible for as long as you hold your breath? What is it like to be half angel, half demon? What is it like to be a werewolf, a wizard, a robot? What is it like? That right there is the trick. Hi there, and welcome back to a bonus episode of OMAKASE. I've been wanting to talk about this forever, and actually the next workshop is also going to be about another stone in my shoe, but that's fine, we'll get there. Write what you know has been this ever-present piece of advice, and at every corner, almost every 6 months, I get this huge question from someone who's new, someone who's been doing this forever, who doesn't understand it, or who was given one perspective of it, a harsh perspective. Never write about anything you yourself have never experienced. That stuff like that is so limiting. Stuff like that sets people off on the wrong path, because you can learn, you can understand, you can research. And also, you can write about things that are important to you. Things, feelings, sensations that capture your imagination. And I know that someone else may disagree with me, especially regarding writing LGBT characters or minorities, but I feel so strongly in my heart that I would rather people learn, empathize, appreciate, open their understanding. Learn, ask. I would very much rather that happened than just to have a blank statement that says, no, you're not allowed to write about this. I very much prefer that people try. I hope this video helped. My name is Max, also known as M. Karen. This has been my point of view, my perspective on writing. I hope that I was useful. I hope that I gave you another point of view, but I hope, above all, that I was good company during your bus ride, during your commute, while you walk your dog, or while you do the dishes. Thank you so much for listening. If you really enjoyed this podcast, please consider going to iTunes and leaving a 5-star rating and a review. It would really mean the world to me and help this podcast grow. If you also would like to support me, I have a Patreon page, link in the description of this video and podcast. And now, let's step into the end of the video club. I'm going to give a shout out to every single person pledging as little as $1 to my Patreon page, patreon.com/amkaren. Starting with Hero Song, Rival Moonlight, Solmuse, Lishadra, Lacey, Irina Phoenix, A. Howard, Angela, Amelia, Elisa Dudley, Heather is Writing, Nicola, Brenda, Pat Eichson, Kristen Lofton, Synexia, Alex Cast, Alistair Baywood, Caitlin, Blarg, Kameshwar Rao Shaluri, Kathy Lindsay, Kaylee, Mary Foster Smith. Hey there, if you're waiting for the cylinders, it's coming. I want to talk more about that guy. But first, I wanted to kind of start the shout-out so that anyone who is not in for the silliness would have just tuned out. So hey, you're already in. Just tag along. I'll finish this and then we'll talk about the weirdness. Mary Foster Smith, Juan Nunes, Christine Dennis, Raquel Fernandez, Alexo Hoshi, Sylvia Leitilla, Janosch Heibotsky, Sky D. White, Eleanor, Renee Solia, Connor, Jay Suwiki, Rhiannon August, Nicolay, Jaytana Kirkwood, James, Aerosos, Wendy Christopher, Noam Sahar, Novels and Tomes, Kiel, Roa, Lier Kilo, Clem Pastor, Nicole Grissom, Biting the Sun. Or, as we would say in Spanish, Biting el Sun. Christiane, Shimmer Tales, Amanda Stevens, Joffrey Raby, C.E. Richards, Jeffrey James Williams, and, last but by no means least, K.M. Anderson. K.M. Anderson. Okay, real talk though. I really didn't want to bring up that guy, but man, that stuff was rough. And I don't mean rough just writing-wise, but like, can you imagine being that person? And I know someone's gonna be like, well, maybe that was just kind of like a cry for help. And maybe, but I feel like you kind of needed to read this. It was kind of dark. Man, that... Now I know what you're thinking. If you remember the very first Omakase Extra with the 3 bad writers, was this the same class? No, it was like a year before those 3 guys showed up. It was still bad though. You know, there was also... Okay. No one's listening, so just a little secret, okay? There was also this one other guy who would write, like... He would basically write fantasies about a character who was just like him, except not lame, and attractive and cool, and would get... basically, like the most self-insert power fantasies ever. And it was just so see-through. The paper he was turning in might as well have been just clear plastic. And like, the worst of all, and listen, here's the thing, okay? I have nothing against self-inserts. I need to make this very clear. It's not that he was writing a self-insert. It's not that he was writing a power fantasy. The problem is that it was a very ineffective story, and at the end of it all suffered from the same pitfalls as most power fantasies and self-insert stories. There was no character development, the character never grew, the main male character never encountered any kind of obstacle or enemy that they couldn't just defeat in a single, what's the word I'm looking for? In a single just wave of a wand. Just boom, just like that, problem's gone, and man, how boring. That's the primary problem with power fantasies, is that there is nothing, in most power fantasies, since the crux of the story is to have a fantasy about being cool and attractive instead of lame, it ends up being this kind of flimsy story. It's basically the same problems that most power fantasies have, where there's no character development because the character or the writer already acknowledges that the main character, self-insert, is basically the coolest guy in all existence and has no reason to improve or grow as a person. And that right there is not effective writing. If anything, because I have no reason to care about that guy. It really showcases the flimsiness of that kind of writing. Listen, if you had a self-insert and a power fantasy, but during said power fantasy with a self-insert, you actually had a character who grew as a person and learned and faced calamity and obstacles in a way that they had to overcome them or become stronger to overcome them or change, I would seldom complain. That's the problem right there. It wasn't that he was writing really, really gross fantasy stuffs, and I don't mean fantasy like elves, but like it was just kind of lame, you know? I don't write stories. I don't write stories. I don't read and write stories to, I don't know, get that sense of fantasy. I don't know. I read and write stories for the struggle, for the character growth, to see them become better, for the struggle against calamity and the quest to overcome one's shortcomings and to manifest upon the world our dreams, character growth, struggle, all the good things, all of which were absent from that guy's writing, and that other guy's, excuse me, I just bunked the mic, and that other guy who was writing the weird stuff with the abusive mother. Jesus Christ, that was so bad. I have I have so many stories like that. I don't want to make it seem that every single person I met at writing class was bad. It's just that the really bad people left an impression, and you know me. It is my life's goal to never have to make the same mistake another person made, to learn from other people's mistakes, and I hope that I can inspire you to do the same. Also, writing is a great way to heal, and I get that. Maybe don't turn that writing in to your college professor and that creative writing class, where a bunch of people have to give you feedback on it. Maybe don't turn that in. Maybe. Also, you should probably not enter your self-insert Fire Emblem Path of Radiance fanfiction with suicidal themes in it. You probably shouldn't turn that in either. That's a reference to the 3 bad writers. Sometimes I look back on my experience and all the things that I've witnessed, and I realize, man, some of that stuff is just weird. I completely forgot about the Path of Radiance fanfiction guy, and I just remembered now. And like, I remember it's weird because the people, those bad writers, really leave an impression on you. Like, I remember what he looks like and sounded like so vividly. Man, but anyhow, I gotta get out of here. So, you take care of you, I'm gonna go take care of me. Listen, write what you know is a big catch-all, and people are gonna make it mean whatever they want to. In a way, that's what I did today. I analyzed it and I brought to you the points that I have experienced and the things that I know about. But instead of telling you don't do this, don't do that, I hope that what you got out of this was me inspiring you to get back into writing. You can research everything. There's nothing you cannot research to become better at writing. And you can have your personal experiences serve as fuel. And you can get better. And you can improve. And I hope that you do that. There's a lot of big catch-all things in writing. And they're all recommendations. tips, advice. But at the end of the day, you have to find what works for you, okay? Keep looking. Keep searching. Keep trying. Keep learning. And never, ever stop writing.